This video is going to be on how to remove the fuel tank on a Kubota BX tractor. I'm sure other models are very similar. My specific model is a BX2350. You'll also be able to see how to get at the fuel sender if your fuel level gauge isn't working on this. So you won't need to follow all the way through. And then one thing that I did, because I thought it was part of my problem, was I added an aftermarket fuel filter system that was upgraded and mounted it right here. I'll be going through the parts that I used to do the project the way I did it, the tools, and then talking about the steps that I went through and some of the mistakes I made while doing this. Bunch of people on tractor forums troubleshoot all kinds of fuel feed problems on these tractors, and end up needing to remove the tank. And they say that it's a huge pain in the ass, which it is. It's not the easiest project, but it's not as bad as they made it sound like it was the end of the world. I probably spent a total of 8 hours. So if you wanted to make it like a weekend project, that'd give you more than enough time to take your time. And if you get frustrated with it, walk away. I did mine over the course of like 3 days after work, and took some breaks when I got to certain points and went and looked some things up. A lot of this information that I have on this video is out there somewhere on the internet, like most of the videos that I put together. And I just decided to consolidate it and put it in one video, so somebody else who was struggling like me and wasn't sure if they wanted to do a project or not could go ahead and do it. So here's the tools that I used. Just a screwdriver with Phillips, and I got the flat bit on there, but you use this little pry bar, something similar to this. You'll see it's for popping off one of the control knobs. A hammer, always need a hammer. Ratchet, whatever size ratchet, and then 19 millimeter, 10 millimeter, 12 millimeter, and 15 millimeter. I'm recording what tools I used after the project, so there might be some other small minor tools, but those are the major sizes for these metric sizes. I would also have the wrenches available, which I do, but I just wanted to lay some tools out for an example. Here's the parts I used for this project. You might need to add a few more depending if you decide to modify for mine, but I went and got 10 feet of a 5/16 fuel line. That's the size fuel line that's used on the tractor. Since you're doing it, you might as well replace the fuel line unless you're doing this on a very new machine. 1/2-inch hose clamps. I only show one here as an example. I'm already done with the project. I'm doing this after the fact. I decided to splice in a cutoff. You'll see it later in the video, for ease of changing the fuel filter, whether you leave the factory one or put the aftermarket one on. That's just good to add, so that way you can shut the fuel off instead of needing to pinch the line to change the filter. A hose barb 5/16. And then this isn't the complete assembly because this was just an extra one that I got. But if you search on eBay, this R12T fuel filter, you can find the entire assembly with the upper part that this screws onto. I'll walk over to the tractor and show you in a second. And then this is the cup. There is a gasket. I have an extra one that goes on the cup for when you thread it on. If you're going to buy it from eBay or something, make sure you get the one that comes with the fittings. There were some listings for the same price that did not come with the fittings. It'll thread in to plug the unused ports, and then, to set it up however you choose to do it. And then the last thing, I don't have an example of it. I talk about it later too, is the bracket I made is actually from like one of the triangle brackets, and I just cut it. You'll see it later in the video. It's one of these brackets, also available at Tractor Supply or wherever, or just make your own, but that's what I used. All right, so the first big obstacle to getting into the fuel tank to clean it out and all that is getting this piece of plastic off. It's actually not as bad as I thought it was, but it is involved. I did the work first instead of recording it because it took me quite a while. So obviously you need to undo the bolts on each side for the rollover protection system. The lights are attached, they go through. That is these pins. They're like watertight butt connectors. You yank on them, they might be a little stuck together. Then I just also popped out the bulbs from the tail lights on there. You can kind of see how these were. They were inside the conduit a little bit. Same on that side. Your handles, one of the bolts goes through here, 14 millimeter from the bottom. This is 19 millimeter, 3/4 on here. There's 2 Phillips screws. Kind of see 1 bolt, 2 big bolts, and then Phillips screws, pretty much the same thing on the other side. There's some carriage bolts here. And I removed, I think there was one more up there I removed that I didn't necessarily have to, so it loosens this up a little bit. One thing that threw me for a loop for a while was removing the handle here. That handle is the valve for your 3-point hitch going up and down. All this does is, see how this has a keyway? There's a pin pressed through the shaft that you can see sticking out. It's just pressed on there like this. What I did to get it off, just take this and a hammer before I got the plastic off and just tapped the back of it, and it came off. The other knob that needs to come off is your deck height adjustment. If you go underneath the tractor, and this one's going to be a little tricky to show you on the camera, but some of the pieces just fell out here on the ground. Nothing be, there's the washer. Let's see if I can climb under here. Didn't come all the way out. I left it there, but this little doohickey, that has a 15 millimeter bolt, and then the rod goes up and through. It's a regular thread. Loosen it, you'll be able to pull it out. The top, you're gonna get a little bit of it grabbing on right here. The knobs on all your levers for PTO engagement, transmission, 4-wheel drive lock, they're little rubber ones. I mean, you just work them off. The seat, I believe it's on this side. You'll see a cotter pin. You pull that cotter pin and then just start working the seat that way. It'll pop out, and then you can work the seat off back and forth. When I'm trying to think if there's anything else. This connector you can kind of get at. Mine was actually not even on there that well. This is for the little 12-volt outlet. I think this was actually off on my tractor before. So when you go to get the plastic off, finally, it's a little bit easier if you take the cap off. I just put it back on there to keep crap from going in the tank, even though I'm going to clean it. Lift the piece of plastic up like this. Get it off this side first. It's going to be a little tricky and tight to pop it past this. I had my wife come out and help me. And then this is not removable as far as I can see. There's just rubber on here. It's not going to do it. So I just worked it back and forth and kept until I got it off, and then the thing lifts out of the way, backing up a lot of the crap that's built up under here. And I'm going to call it quits for tonight on that. And tomorrow I'm going to drain the tank out and figure out how to completely remove it. Remove this. And this, see, this screw was loose. Interesting. But really not that bad, even though it looks terrible. Just take your time. Sorry if this seems a little out of order, because there's some other stuff going on that you're going to see later in the video, but I did end up needing to take the metal like foot plate and stuff off. The extra thing that you need to do from what I showed you is there's like a little plastic that covers up here, and there's like one bolt that goes through this hole right here, and then that piece of plastic will come off. Then there's some carriage bolts up in the front, and then take the pieces of plastic off, and then you sort of need to like pull it up over and then rotate it and fiddle with the pedals and stuff a little bit in order to get the metal piece off. And then just so I had access to it too, I ended up taking my loader, the grill guard, and the plastic shroud up here off so I could get at it more. All right, I have the fuel tank loose now. What I need to do is you get this little bracket. It's going across here. It's got a couple bolts. You can see where the dust was down here. Carriage bolts, 12 millimeters on this side. So you have access to it. I removed the plug for one of the safety switches here. I might end up needing to move this out of the way. Definitely would make it easier, but I'm going to try leaving it there. And then the two big bolts right here. One thing I just realized, and if I knew this before, I would have taken care of it, but this is all held in place by the ropes and then those two bolts. So this kind of came loose and pulled back a little bit. Live and learn, but I got it loose now. So hoping I'll be able to wedge it out of there. Oh, mine was stuck on there, but this has a little pinch fitting. This is the return fuel line. I couldn't get it off and I didn't want to damage it. So I cut it, and then I'll use a razor blade to get this off. And then there's plenty of slack to put it on there. Dummy me, I kind of almost forgot to, because I'd already done this to check it. You're going to have to take your fuel sender out and disconnect the wires and get them out of the way. Also, the wires out of the way for the seat safety switch. And then I'd already had it done as well to drain my tank. You'll have to disconnect this from the fuel filter because it's attached to the tank, so that way it's free and it'll pull out with it. That's your fuel feed line. All right, got it off. I didn't have to fully remove this switch, but I loosened it so it'd slide back and forth. Don't forget to tighten that back up. Man, there's a lot of crap stuck under here. I clean it out while I'm at it. Now to clean the tank. Even though I don't think that actually ended up being my problem, I'd made it far enough where I'm going to do that. My tank didn't end up being dirty, but I went ahead and kind of rinsed it out anyway. I put maybe like 10 ounces of diesel in there. A couple of times I put the fuel sender back on, held my finger over that vent, swished it around a whole bunch, and I just put the little nipple with the drain valve. Truck keys, they're not getting fuel on them. And just put a little catch pan. Very little debris came out at all. And it may have even just been from when I had these open and taken it out. Well, put a little bit of fuel in there and shook it around really good a couple of times, and I mean, it came out a little dirty. I don't know if you can see it in the video, but there's a little bit of stuff in there, but it wasn't anything crazy like some other people have shown has come out of theirs with the fuel sender and stuff rotting out, especially considering this tractor is 11 years old, and for the first 8 years of its life, It had less than 300 hours put on it. Sat around a lot. It's pretty clean. All right, so I decided to mount the new fuel filter here. I didn't put the second bolt in yet because I do want to confirm that this is all going to be good. But the bolt I'm using is the one that holds the steering hydraulic lines in place. I'm going to drill a second one if it's good. And what this bracket is one of the brackets that'll hold a triangle like this. And then I just measured it up, cut it off, drilled holes in it. And the way I'm doing this, some people will disagree with me. I didn't want to have too much fuel line. Mounting it here, if it was to come directly from the tank to here, then go back to the pump, and then the pump lifted up here, that was unnecessary. What I'm going to do is, the filter's still there, but I've only put new line up to the pump that's right under here. I'm going to run from the inside of the pump directly out of the tank. That pump's like $25 to replace, and I have a spare one on hand. So for me, this is more convenient. Less line, hopefully no problems purging air. I may need to trim just a little bit of plastic off of the little shroud that comes up here on the side to make sure that it's going to clear this, just because I wanted the bottom of this to be above the frame of the tractor. Go figure. If I had more materials to fabricate, what I would have done is made the bracket back here a little bit more, because then you have more room for it to be out of the way. But we'll see how it works. All right, so I got the fuel tank back in place. Finished running the fuel line. I'll try to get underneath so you can kind of see it. It's hard to see. But last night I stopped getting it to that part right before the pump. And then I still added my little cutoff valve, so when I want to replace the fuel filter, I can. And then, you know, I lightly zip tied up the fuel return line and the fuel feed line. Came up about where it was. Again, putting it loose because this is where it was kinked before. Running it up in there, I used a hose clamp. Fix this, hook the sender back up. The sender is working. Talked earlier about how if I would have known, I would have removed the 3-point stuff, because when I undid these bolts, it came back, so I had to lower it, jack it up with my regular floor jack to get these bolts to line up. Put just a little bit of fuel in there, started the key, opened this up to bleed some of the air out. Don't know if I got it all, but in 2 cranks it started. So you can see the fuel gauge does go up and down just a little bit. Hear the pump clicking, and before it was a very uneven sound. Sometimes it would be quiet, sometimes it would be loud. The fuel bowl filled up completely, which means there's fuel going up there. My key sticks so the glove nut stays on. But look at that, started right up. Before it would have a hard time starting. And one thing that I noticed too, which you probably won't be able to see in the video, but if I bring the throttle all the way open really quick, I actually get a little bit of black smoke, which almost never happened before. All the way at low. But yeah, so now to just put all the body back together. I'm going to sit here and let it run for a while and see if any leaks come up. Most of the way put back together, I'm calling it a night. Did just want to take like a little progress at this point with some little mistakes that I made putting it back together. This fuel line is supposed to get routed behind this plate. when you bolt this back together and put the tank in place. What I'm going to end up having to do, because I'm obviously not going to rip it apart, is I'll cut it, route it where it needs to go, and then use 2 hose clamps. You run the risk of it getting pinned underneath the springs for the seat and the clamp and stuff like that. Next thing that I really didn't pay attention to, which I'll have to mess with, is this little spring under here for the safety switch. I'm assuming it does something. I'll have to mess with it more on how exactly it's supposed to sit, because no matter what, the seat's up or down, the tractor will still start. It's not that big of a deal to me, but I'll try to get it right. This plastic, put it on first before the metal footplate area. You probably won't be able to see it. Well, you kind of can. That little wire loom there is actually covering up one of the fuel lines. What I did when I zip tied them down is I zip tied them right in the way of this to go up and down. So I had to reach in there, snip that, and then move everything around. It's not an easy fit. I can see why even from the factory that line was a little pinched. When you're tightening this up, you'll want to lower the 3-point hitch a little bit. The reason being is when you go to tighten it, this will turn and it'll hit a point where it stops completely. So that way you're not trying to hold this up here while tightening that 15mm bolt back down. That's it as far as I've gotten right now. All right, I got it all back together. Everything's going pretty good. Wanted to note, I've already said it once, make sure you put this back where it belongs, under the seat. I forgot to put the bracket on that holds the owner's manual and stuff. I don't really care too much about that. The spring, pay attention to how that's supposed to go. I kept messing with it to try to figure it out and ended up bending it really bad. So, oh well, not too worried about it. Gotta put my fire extinguisher back on there. All my lights work. Ended up, you can see it probably looks a lot worse in the video than it really looks in person. I didn't try too hard to make it neat, but I used the Dremel. Just gave it plenty of extra space, like even if this zip tie breaks, so it won't chafe real bad. It did come down and it was pretty much vibrating and touching the fuel line like I'd thought. But where I chose to put it, you can see it gives me clearance. So I'm going to use it for a while. I still only have the 1 bolt in there. And then if I notice it dancing around, I'll drill a hole and put a second one in there. I don't really know what else to say. You might need to go get some new of these little body trim pieces. A few of mine were destroyed, but I have a kit of them from pulling them off. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, if you already made it to the point where you're reassembling it after you took it apart, you should be able to figure it out. I ended up going through all that, and it was just a kinked fuel line, but at least I know my tank's clean now. My fuel sender is good. Put the new fuel filter on, and tractor starts good now. Alright, so I kept going here on this project, and I just broke a zip tie that was up here, and I may have found my problem. It might not be the tank. You can see, it looks like the fuel line was pinched really good against this hydraulic line. That's pretty good pinch. I guess I wouldn't have really been able to tell that unless all this was off. But if that was the problem, I didn't really need to go through all this work. Oh well. Now that I have the line free, it is flowing the way that it should. If I take the line and pinch it just a little bit like the zip tie was, I get almost no flow. So it looks like that's what my problem actually was.